My father raised his glass in front of 40 relatives and said the house was going to my brother. Afternoon sun hit the backyard in slats through the oak trees, and I could hear ice clinking in plastic cups and someone's toddler shrieking on the swing set. He stood there in his new polo shirt, shoulders back like a man who'd rehearsed this moment in the bathroom mirror, and announced that the $2.5 million house, the one I'd refinanced, maintained, and paid for over 5 years, now belonged to Derek. Then he turned to me, smiled, and said, "Thank you for saving our house, Faith." Like I was the caterer. Like I'd brought a nice dessert. What my father didn't know was that the house couldn't go anywhere without my signature on the transfer. And what happened next, when my 84-year-old grandfather pushed himself to his feet and opened a leather folder nobody had noticed, that made the house look like pocket change. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. My name is Faith Henderson. I'm 34 years old and I spent 16 years serving this country in the United States Army. This is the story of how my family thanked me for saving their house by giving it to someone else, and what my grandfather did when he'd had enough. If this hits close to home, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. I was stationed at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, had been for 3 years by then. My alarm went off at 0500 every morning, and by 0515 I was running the perimeter road in the dark, boots on gravel, breath fogging in front of me. I held the rank of Sergeant First Class, E7, 16 years in, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and a military occupational specialty that most people found about as exciting as watching paint dry, Financial Management Technician, MOS 36B. I managed payroll. I tracked expenditures. I reconciled accounts for units with budgets larger than most small towns. My apartment off-post was a 1-bedroom with a kitchen counter barely wide enough for a cutting board. Bed made tight enough to bounce a quarter. Towels folded in thirds. I lived alone, and I liked it that way, because solitude is different from loneliness when you've chosen it. After duty hours, 3 evenings a week, I drove to the community center near Gate 4 and taught a class I'd built myself. I called it Steady Ground, a financial literacy program for junior enlisted soldiers and their spouses. Budgeting, debt management, how to read a credit report without your eyes glazing over. I wasn't paid for it. Nobody asked me to do it. I did it because when you know how to keep people from drowning in their own bank statements, standing on the shore feels criminal. That was my problem, if I'm being honest. I couldn't watch someone struggle with something I knew how to fix. Not in my unit. Not in my family. Every month, on the 1st, I transferred $400 to my parents' joint account in Asheville. I told myself it was for the house. Looking back, it was for the hope that someone would notice. My grandmother's grandfather clock still ticked in the hallway of the house I grew up in. I used to fall asleep to that sound. Now I fell asleep to the hum of a window air conditioner in a rented apartment 4 hours away. My father, Robert Henderson, opened Henderson Hardware when I was 10 years old. 1 aisle in a rented warehouse on the west side of Asheville. He stocked lumber, fasteners, PVC pipe, and a dream that his children would carry the whole thing forward. By the time I was in middle school, the warehouse had become a proper storefront. By high school, he'd opened a second location near Black Mountain. He walked through those aisles like a king surveying land. My mother, Patricia, kept the books. She had a way of talking about the business like it was a family member with a heartbeat. "This store is our retirement, Faith. This store is our children's future." She said that at dinner. She said that at church. She said that when she tucked me in at night, as though I needed to understand, even at 12, that my security depended on inventory turnover. My brother Derek was 3 years younger and already working the register by the time he was 14. My father brought him to supplier meetings, taught him to negotiate bulk pricing, let him sit in on conversations with the accountant. When I asked if I could work the summer shifts, my father said, "You should focus on school, honey. Derek needs the experience." He said it kindly. That was the thing about my father. He never raised his voice when he was cutting you out. He just rearranged the room so there was no chair left for you. I stood at the front door that evening after dinner, my hand on the brass doorknob. I could hear my father quizzing Derek on margin percentages in the living room. The metal was cold under my palm, smooth from decades of hands turning it. I didn't go in. I went upstairs and started researching military recruiters on the family desktop. The only person who ever asked me what I wanted was my grandfather. Raymond Henderson lived in a one-room cabin at the edge of my parents' property, separated from the main house by a gravel path and a wooden fence he'd built himself. The family knew him as a retired army man who grew tomatoes and fixed things. That was the entire biography anyone bothered to learn. One afternoon the summer before my senior year, I sat on his porch and told him I was thinking about enlisting. He didn't react the way my parents would have. He didn't panic or lecture or redirect. He leaned back in his rocking chair and said, "What branch?" I said Army. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he'd already known. "Good," he said. "The Army made me who I am. I think it'll do the same for you." He didn't push me, he didn't recruit me. He just made space for me to say the thing I'd been afraid to say out loud. His cabin smelled like cedar and gun oil. It smelled like the only place in my life where I was allowed to take up space. I signed my enlistment papers 3 months later. My father sat at the kitchen table and said nothing. My mother cried in the hallway and told me I was abandoning them. Derek, 15 years old and already wearing a Henderson hardware polo to school, shrugged and said, "More room for me." I shipped out to basic training at Fort Jackson in August. The morning I left, my grandfather was the only one standing in the driveway. He handed me a folded piece of paper with his phone number on it and said, "Call me when you need someone who'll listen." I called him every Sunday for 16 years. 16 years compresses into a highlight reel when you tell it later. Basic training, advanced individual training at Fort Jackson, where I learned the Army runs on paperwork before it runs on ammunition. My first duty station in Germany, where I reconciled accounts for a battalion-sized element and discovered I had a talent for finding the 13 cents that threw off a six-figure ledger. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, Bagram, then Kandahar. I managed payroll for 300 soldiers in a combat zone. Supply lines got hit, communication went dark for days, and I still closed the books on time. $0 unaccounted for. Not one. I earned my stripes the slow way. Specialist to sergeant to staff sergeant to sergeant first class. Every promotion board, I showed up in pressed dress greens with binders thicker than the competition's. I got my accredited financial counselor certification on my own time, studied for it in a plywood office that shook every time a helicopter landed. I built steady ground during a long stretch at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, when I noticed junior soldiers drowning in predatory car loans and payday lender traps. Nobody told me to build it. I just couldn't sit still while 19-year-olds with combat pay signed contracts they couldn't read. Through all of it, I sent $400 home every month, and every Christmas and every summer reunion, I drove the 4 hours to Asheville and walked through the front door of a house that felt less like mine each year. The store looked thinner every visit. Fewer customers. Derek drove a new truck. My parents talked to him about vendor contracts and expansion plans over dinner. They asked me one question. "So how's the Army?" Then the conversation moved on. The last time I visited before everything changed, I found a foreclosure notice jammed between credit card offers in the mail pile on the kitchen counter. My father called me at 2 in the morning. I'd never heard him cry before. The sound came through my phone like static, halting, wet, ashamed. "We're going to lose the house, Faith. I don't know what to do." I was in my apartment in Fayetteville, sitting on the edge of my bed in a t-shirt and running shorts, and I said, "Tell me everything." He did. He'd taken a second mortgage on the house 3 years earlier to inject cash into Henderson hardware after the pandemic crushed foot traffic. The balance was $380,000, 3 months past due. His credit score was 520. Derek's was 490. The bank had already started the foreclosure timeline. I spent the next 72 hours on the phone with lenders, running numbers on my laptop between duty shifts. I found a path. A VA loan refinance. Lower interest rate, extended term, monthly payment cut by 40%. There was only one catch. A VA loan requires the borrower to be on the deed. My name would go on the house. My mother said, "It's just paperwork, honey. We appreciate you." My father said, "We'll sort out the deed later. Right now, just save the house." I saved it. I restructured the mortgage, set up autopay from my checking account, and absorbed the monthly payments into my budget. $1,240 a month. I ate at the dining facility more often. I stopped buying coffee off post. I didn't do it for leverage. I didn't do it thinking someday I'd need a trump card. I did it because my father was drowning and I knew how to swim. "We'll sort out the deed later," he'd said. Later never came. Nobody brought it up again. And I was too busy paying the mortgage to argue about whose name was on it. 5 years. That's how long I managed that house from 4 hours away. I set up automatic mortgage payments from my checking account. Every quarter, I reviewed the property tax assessment online, verified the homeowner's insurance renewal, and coordinated with contractors for maintenance. A roof patch here, a water heater replacement there, exterior repainting in year 3. I did it all through phone calls during lunch breaks and emails sent at 2200 hours after steady ground sessions. Derek lived in the house rent-free. He didn't pay utilities, didn't mow the lawn. My parents hired a landscaping service, which I paid for because they said the store was too tight that month. Every month was too tight. Every Christmas when I visited, my mother met me at the door with a list. Leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Crack in the basement wall. Side gate sticking. She'd hand me the list and say, "You're so handy, sweetie. Derek's been so busy with the store." I replaced the faucet cartridge. I sealed the basement crack. I sanded and rehung the gate. I polished the brass doorknob on the front door because it had gone dull since my last visit. 53 times in 5 years I polished that doorknob. Nobody noticed. I asked myself more than once why I kept doing it. The mortgage payments, the maintenance, the $400 on top. And the answer was always the same ugly, stubborn thing, because if I stopped, the house would fall apart. And if the house fell apart, it meant nobody in this family could hold anything together without me. And also, that nobody would care enough to try. One evening in March, sorting through property records on my laptop, I got an email alert from a legal monitoring service I'd set up for the Henderson Hardware business registration. A new UCC filing had appeared under the company name. I knew what a UCC filing meant the way most people know what a check engine light means. Something is wrong, and someone is borrowing against something they probably shouldn't. I pulled it up on the North Carolina Secretary of State website. Derek had taken out a merchant cash advance for $180,000, secured against Henderson Hardware's inventory and equipment. The interest rate equivalent was 38% APR. This wasn't a business loan. It was a lifeline from a company that profits from desperation. I called my father the next morning. I kept my voice level, the way I briefed commanders on budget shortfalls. "Dad, Derek took out a merchant cash advance. The interest alone is eating the business alive. He owes $180,000 on an advance that's probably only netting him $120,000 after fees." My father's voice went cold. "Derek knows what he's doing. Don't be jealous because he's there and you're not. You chose to leave, Faith." My mother picked up the extension. "Honey, Derek is under a lot of pressure running the store by himself. He doesn't need his sister checking up on him. We'll handle it." They didn't handle it. I tried calling Derek directly. He didn't pick up. His text back was blunt. "Mind your own business." I called a real estate attorney in Asheville. She explained what I already suspected. My name was on the deed and the mortgage. The house could not be sold or transferred without my signature. If I wanted to force a resolution, I could file a partition action, a lawsuit that would compel a sale and split the proceeds. I wrote the attorney's number in my phone. I saved the webpage for partition filings in North Carolina. I did not file anything. I didn't want to sue my family. I wanted them to listen. They never did. 5 years I kept that house standing. The mortgage, the taxes, the leaking roof, the property insurance. 5 years, and my father's thank you was a phone call, telling me to stop asking questions about my brother's debt. If you've ever poured your heart into something and been told you were overstepping, stay with me. What happened at that reunion changed the meaning of every single payment I ever made. The invitation came in April. My mother called with the voice she used when she wanted something gift-wrapped in obligation. "It's the big reunion this year, sweetie. Your father has a special announcement. Please come." I asked what the announcement was. She deflected the way she always did. Half answer, half redirect. "It's a surprise. Something wonderful for the family." Whenever my mother said something wonderful for the family, she meant something wonderful for Derek. I had 15 years of data to support that conclusion. I almost said no. I had a steady ground session scheduled that Saturday. I had laundry to do. I had a dozen excuses lined up like rounds in a magazine. Then my grandfather called. Raymond's voice was different. Not his usual easy drawl. Something underneath it, sharp, deliberate. "Come to the reunion, Faith. I need you there." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. "Trust me," he said. That was all he said. And he was the only person in my family who'd earned the right to say it. I put in my leave request the next morning. I ironed my civilian clothes, a pair of dark jeans, a white blouse, boots. I packed the way I packed for everything. One bag, nothing extra. On the drive down, 4 hours of mountain highway, I turned over possibilities. Announcement could mean an engagement for Derek. Could mean a store expansion. Could mean the house. The more I thought about it, the more the house made sense. My father had been talking about the future of the Henderson legacy for months in our sparse phone calls. Legacy was his word for things he controlled. I gripped the steering wheel and watched the Blue Ridge fold out in front of me like a quilt somebody had crumpled and never smoothed. I stopped at Henderson Hardware on the way in. Force of habit. Or maybe I wanted evidence before I wanted dinner. The parking lot had 4 cars in it on a Friday afternoon. The storefront paint was peeling near the gutters. Through the window, I could see one employee sitting behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. The sale banner in the window looked like it had been there since last season. I drove onto the house. It looked good from the outside. It should have. I'd paid $12,000 in maintenance and landscaping over the past 2 years. Fresh paint on the trim. Clean gutters. The Japanese maple my grandmother planted in the front yard was full and green. I parked behind Derek's truck, which was newer than mine. I got out, walked up the porch steps, and put my hand on the brass doorknob. Still smooth. I'd polished it 6 weeks ago during a quick overnight trip to check on the water heater installation. I opened the door. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked the way it always had. Steady, indifferent, counting seconds that nobody was counting with it. Derek was on the couch watching a baseball game. He looked up but didn't stand. "Hey sis, Mom said you were coming." Like I was a delivery he'd been told to expect. I carried my bag upstairs to what used to be my room. Patricia had turned it into a storage space. Boxes of Christmas decorations, a treadmill nobody used, Derek's old lacrosse equipment. My bed was gone. A futon mattress leaned against the wall. "Your brother needed the closet space," my mother explained from the doorway, already holding a list of things that needed fixing. On Derek's desk in the spare room downstairs, I noticed a stack of envelopes with return addresses from companies I recognized: Ken Capital, Libertas Funding, Yellowstone Capital, debt collection agencies for merchant cash advances. I didn't sleep well on the futon. The springs dug into my shoulder blades, and the room smelled like cardboard and attic dust. At 0100, I gave up trying and opened my laptop on the floor. I ran a fresh search on the NC Secretary of State website for UCC filings under Henderson Hardware, LLC. What came back made my stomach drop. It wasn't one merchant cash advance, it was 3. The first, the one I'd found in March, was $180,000 from Can Capital. The second was $90,000 from Libertas Funding, filed 4 months later. The third was $70,000 from Yellowstone Capital, filed just 6 weeks ago. Total, $340,000 in high-interest merchant cash advances, all secured against the store's inventory and equipment. One of them was already in default. I pulled up the store's estimated market value from the county property records. Henderson Hardware's real estate plus equipment plus inventory came to roughly $600,000. Subtract $340,000 in liens. Equity, $260,000. Less than half what my father probably thought it was worth. Then there was the house. Market value around $2.3 million based on recent comps in the neighborhood. Subtract the $220,000 remaining on the mortgage I was still paying. But if the store's creditors came after Robert's personal guarantee, which merchant cash advance companies almost always require, the house could get tangled in a judgment lien. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my father's contact. Then I set it down. I had warned them once. They told me I was jealous. I was not going to beg to be heard a second time. I opened my notes app instead. Typed every number. Saved it. Data, not drama. The morning of the reunion broke clear and warm. June in Asheville. The kind of day that makes the mountains look soft-focused, like a photograph someone ran through a filter. My mother had been up since dawn, commanding the kitchen like a forward operating base. Potato salad, deviled eggs, 3 kinds of coleslaw. She handed me a tray of plastic cups the moment I came downstairs. Set these on the folding tables out back, sweetie. You're so good at organizing. Derek was still asleep at 10. Family started arriving by 11. Aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, family friends whose connection to the Hendersons I'd never fully mapped. Cars filled the driveway and spilled onto the street. 3 folding tables materialized on the back lawn. Someone set up a canopy for shade. The grill was already smoking. Kids ran laps around the oak trees. 40 people, give or take. 3 generations of Hendersons and their orbiting satellites. My father moved through the crowd like a candidate working a room. New polo shirt, leather belt. He shook hands, slapped backs, laughed too loud. He looked like a man who had something to announce. Because he did. Marlene Odom arrived carrying a casserole dish. She was the longtime neighbor from the next property over. A retired nurse in her late 50s who'd known my grandfather for 22 years. She set the dish on the food table, scanned the crowd, found me, and smiled. It was a strange smile, warm but knowing, like she was in on something I wasn't, or something I was about to be. My grandfather sat at the farthest table, alone, wearing a faded veteran's cap. I walked over and kissed his cheek. He took my hand and held it for a moment. "Whatever happens today," he said, "stand tall. That's an order." Through the open kitchen window behind us, the grandfather clock struck noon. After lunch, my father stood up. He picked up a knife and tapped it against his glass. The universal signal for everyone to stop chewing and pay attention. "I have an announcement," he said. "Something I've been thinking about for a long time." The backyard went quiet except for the cicadas and one toddler who hadn't learned social cues yet. My father started with the history. Henderson Hardware. Founded in a rented warehouse, built with sweat equity and 30-hour weekends. This family was built on hard work and staying put. He said that last part like a thesis statement. Staying put. As if geography were a moral virtue. He looked at Derek, who was sitting 2 seats from me, and his face softened the way it always did when it turned toward his son. Derek has been right here, every single day, keeping our family business alive, rain or shine, pandemic or not, he stayed. I knew what alive meant. It meant $340,000 in predatory debt. It meant 1 defaulted advance. It meant a parking lot with 4 cars on a Friday afternoon. But I kept my face still. 16 years of military bearing will do that for you. Then my father looked at me. The softness left. What replaced it was courtesy. The kind you give to someone you respect the way you respect a stranger who holds the door for you. And faith. Well, faith chose a different path. We respect that. Respect. The word landed on me like a form letter. Thank you for your application. We regret to inform you. Two of my aunts exchanged a glance. My cousin Beth, sitting across from me, tightened her lips. My mother sat beside Derek, nodding along like a woman watching her script play out exactly as rehearsed. My grandfather didn't move. His hands gripped the edge of his table, knuckles white against the wood. Between the announcement, preamble, and dessert, I slipped away to the kitchen to fill a glass of water. Raymond followed me in. He moved quietly for 84, the kind of quiet that comes from decades of practice. "Walk with me," he said. We went out the side door and down the gravel path toward his cabin. 200 steps. Neither of us spoke. The path cut between his vegetable garden and the wooden fence, past tomato cages and pole beans climbing twine. The cabin door was unlocked. It always was. Inside, everything was the same as it had been for 30 years. Single bed, tight corners, small wooden desk with a reading lamp, bookshelf lined with military history and farmers' almanacs. No television, no clutter. "Sit," he said, pointing to the desk chair. He lowered himself onto the edge of the bed and looked at me with eyes that had seen things most people only read about. "Under the bed," he said. "The footlocker. Open it." I knelt. The footlocker was olive drab, scuffed at the corners, with a brass latch that still locked and turned. I flipped the latch and lifted the lid. Cedar rushed up at me. The same smell from every afternoon I'd ever spent in this cabin, from every story he'd told me about the old days that I now realized I'd never fully understood. Folded on top, a dress uniform. Not the standard issue Class A's I was used to. This was a green beret, Special Forces. Beneath it, a beret, forest green, folded flat, and beneath that, medals, 3 bronze stars, a silver star with a V device. Deployment photos, a young Raymond, lean and angular, standing in jungle so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground. "Grandpa," I said, "you were Special Forces?" 26 years, he said. 3 wars. Nobody in this family thought to ask. Raymond let me hold the silver star for a moment. It was heavier than I expected. Then he reached into the footlocker and lifted a panel of cedar lining I hadn't noticed. A false bottom, military precise. Beneath it sat a brown leather folder, creased with age, but well-maintained. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside was a document I recognized by format before I read the first word. A trust instrument. The Henderson Legacy Trust, established under North Carolina General Statutes. Chapter 36C. Grantor. Raymond W. Henderson. Trustee. Faith Ann Henderson. Attorney of Record. Morrison and Welch. Estate Planning. Asheville, North Carolina. The assets were listed on the second page. 4 rental properties in Buncombe, Henderson, Transylvania, and Madison counties. An index fund portfolio with Vanguard. Total estimated net asset value, $8.2 million. I read the number twice, then a third time. "Grandpa, I can't. This is..." He raised his hand. "Stop. Listen." His voice was the voice of a man who had given orders that determined whether people lived or died, and it carried the same weight now, in a cabin that smelled like cedar and old wool. "I didn't give you this because you're my granddaughter. I gave you this because for 16 years, you served. You saved a house that isn't yours. You warned your father about debts he refused to see. You built something called steady ground that helps strangers learn to stand on their own. You earn this trust the way I earn these medals, by showing up when it would have been easier not to." He looked out the window toward the main house. I could hear laughter from the reunion, faint and strange from this distance. "Some people serve," he said quietly. "Others just stay." He closed the footlocker. "Go back to the party. Wait for my signal." "What signal?" He almost smiled. "You'll know." Marlene was standing at the cabin door when I turned around. She gave me a single nod. She'd seen everything. I walked back to the party on legs that didn't feel entirely connected to my body. $8.2 million. My grandfather, the man my father dismissed as a senile gardener, had been quietly building a financial empire for 3 decades, while everyone assumed he lived on his VA pension. I sat down at the table next to my cousin Beth, who looked at me and frowned. You okay? You look like you saw a ghost. Just the opposite, I said. I didn't elaborate. My phone was still open to the tab I'd saved months ago. How to file a partition action in North Carolina. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed the tab. Deleted the screenshot I'd saved of the filing instructions. I didn't need a lawsuit. I had never wanted a lawsuit. What I wanted was far simpler and far harder. I wanted my family to hear the truth from someone they couldn't dismiss. They dismissed me every time I spoke. But my grandfather was the kind of man who, once he stood up, did not sit down until he was finished. Across the yard, Raymond returned to his table. He sat with Marlene, both of them calm, both of them still, like two people who had made a decision and were simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. Under his chair, I could see the brown leather folder. He'd brought it back from the cabin. My father was by the grill, laughing about something with Uncle Tom. Derek was taking a selfie with two of our younger cousins. My mother was directing traffic with a spatula, telling Aunt Lorraine where to put the peach cobbler. Nobody was watching Raymond. Nobody ever watched Raymond. That was the whole point. Dessert plates were still being passed when my father stood up again. All right, everyone, he said, tapping the glass one more time. Before we wrap up, let me finish what I started earlier. He positioned himself at the head of the center table. Patriarch staging, maximum visibility. He put his hand on Derek's shoulder. I've decided that this house, the one your mother and I have poured our lives into, will go to Derek. He's earned it. He's been here. A smattering of applause, a few hear murmurs. Derek grinned and raised his glass. Thanks, Dad, I won't let you down. My father turned to me. He squared his shoulders the way he did when he was about to say something he considered generous. And Faith, thank you for saving our house for 5 years. We couldn't have done it without you. There it was. The line. Delivered to 40 people who didn't know what it actually meant. Thank you for saving our house. He said it the way you thank a plumber for unclogging the drain. Service rendered. Payment. A sentence. My mother dabbed her eyes with a paper napkin. We're so blessed to have both our children. The table waited for me to respond. I could feel the weight of 40 gazes. Smiles that expected grace. Nods that expected gratitude. I sat there. Hands on my thighs. Jaw set. Face neutral. Inside me, something ticked like the grandfather clock in the hallway, measuring the distance between what I'd given and what I'd received. Through the kitchen window, I could hear it. 12 chimes. Though it wasn't noon anymore. The clock was old. It ran on its own schedule. Raymond sat at the far table, still as stone. His cap pulled low, his hands resting on his knees. He hadn't moved. The table filled with small talk, the kind designed to wallpaper over awkwardness. Uncle Tom nodded thoughtfully and said, That's fair. The boy's been here. Aunt Lorraine agreed. Derek's kept the lights on. Nobody asked what the lights cost. Derek leaned back in his chair and hooked one arm over my father's shoulder. I'm thinking about renovating the kitchen, Dad. Maybe open up that wall between the dining room and the den. My mother beamed. See, Faith? Everything works out. Derek will keep the house beautiful. My mother believed she was being kind. She was smiling at me the way people smile at someone they've decided is fine. The decision made before the question is asked. That was the part that hurt most. I stood up. The table tensed, people shifting, forks lowering. They thought I was leaving. They expected me to leave. The overlooked daughter excusing herself before the tears started. I walked into the kitchen. The screen door banged behind me. I filled a glass of water at the sink and stood there, staring at the backsplash tile my mother had picked out in 2019, the same year I'd wired $12,000 to keep the bank from taking the house. My hand rested on the kitchen door frame, right next to where the brass doorknob caught the afternoon light. I didn't polish it. When I walked back outside, I looked across the yard at my grandfather. Our eyes met. He gave me one nod. Small. Deliberate. The kind of nod that in the army means, hold position, we're almost there. I understood. He had his move, but I had mine, and mine came first. I walked back to the table. I didn't sit down. I stood at the end, water glass in hand, and waited for the chatter to notice me. My father just gave away my house in front of 40 people. The house I saved, the mortgage I carry, the deed with my name on it. He called it Derek's. Everyone clapped. Nobody asked me. If you've ever watched someone hand away the thing you built with your own hands and smile about it, stick around. Because what happens next, first from me, then from my grandfather, nobody in that backyard saw coming. The chatter died in sections. First the cousins near me, then the aunts, then the uncles. One by one, they noticed I was standing. My father turned. Faith, sit down. Have some cobbler. Dad, I said. Before everyone leaves, I need to clarify something. His jaw tightened. Faith, this isn't the time? Actually, I said, it's exactly the time. You just made a property announcement in front of the entire family. I'm making a property clarification. I set my water glass on the table. My voice was level. The same register I used when briefing colonels on quarterly expenditure reports. Flat, precise. No emotion leaking through the syllables. When you couldn't make the mortgage payments in 2021, I refinanced this house using my VA loan eligibility. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. I have been making every payment for 5 years, $1,240 a month, plus property tax, plus insurance, plus every contractor who replaced the roof, the water heater, and the exterior paint. My father blinked. That was temporary, Faith. We agreed. We didn't agree on anything, Dad. You asked me to save the house. I did. Then you never mentioned it again. My mother stood halfway. Honey, that's a technicality. A deed is not a technicality, Mom. It's the law. The murmurs started. Low. Uncertain. Uncle Tom set his plate down. Cousin Beth leaned forward. Aunt Lorraine glanced at her husband. Derek's face had gone the color of the potato salad. Pale, slightly curdled. He stared at me with an expression I'd seen on soldiers who just learned their leave was canceled. Denial, dissolving into dread. Derek spoke first. Faith, come on, don't do this here. I'm not the one who chose here, Derek. Dad did. I kept my voice the same. Flat, briefing tone. Since we're being transparent, let's talk about the house's actual value. Dad says $2.5 million. The county assessment is $2.3. Subtract the $220,000 I still owe on the mortgage, then subtract the $340,000 in merchant cash advance liens that Derek took out against the store's inventory. My father's head turned toward Derek like a turret tracking a target. What liens? Derek, what is she talking about? Derek's face crumpled. His voice came out thin, fraying at the edges. Dad, it's not. I was going to pay it back. The store was bleeding. I couldn't let it die. You gave it to me, and I couldn't let it die. For a moment, I saw something under my brother's bravado that I hadn't expected. Desperation that had nothing to do with money. Derek didn't want the store. He wanted our father to look at him the way our father looked at the store, as something worth saving. He'd been a boy sitting on the stockroom floor sorting nails into buckets because Dad said it built character, and 20 years later he was still sorting nails, still trying to earn a nod. The cash advances weren't greed. They were a son drowning quietly so his father wouldn't hear the splash. I saw it. I understood it. And it didn't change a single number on the ledger. I'm sorry you were in that position, Derek, I said. But your pain doesn't cancel out my payments, and it doesn't make this house yours. My father's face went from white to red in the space of a breath. You're lying, he said. Derek wouldn't. UCC filings are public record, Dad. Anyone with internet access can verify. The file numbers are on the Secretary of State's website. Uncle Tom already had his phone out. I watched him type. His wife, Aunt Carol, leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the screen. My mother sat down slowly, like someone lowering themselves into a bath that's too hot. Faith Henderson, you are ruining this day, she said. Her voice was careful, controlled. The voice of a woman who managed books and believed numbers should stay in columns, not out in the yard. This was supposed to be a celebration. It was supposed to be a lot of things, Mom. It was supposed to be fair. Derek was still in his chair, head in his hands. He hadn't spoken since his confession. Two of the younger cousins had drifted to the edge of the yard, sensing adult weather they didn't want to be caught in. A child laughed on the swing set, bright and oblivious. My father stepped toward me. So what do you want, Faith? You want the house? You want to sell it? You want to tear this family apart over paperwork? I don't want the house, Dad. That stopped him. I never wanted the house. I wanted you to see what I did to keep it standing. And I wanted you to stop pretending Derek held everything together when he was drowning in debt you refused to acknowledge. Silence. Real silence. The kind that has weight and texture. The grandfather clock inside the house struck 1, a single chime that carried through the kitchen window and out across the yard. Nobody heard it but me. Uncle Tom put his phone down on the table. She's right, Robert. I just pulled up the UCC filings on the state website. 3 liens on Henderson Hardware, Ken Capital, Libertas Funding, Yellowstone Capital. Total listed, $340,000. My father turned on him. Tom, stay out of this. You made it everyone's business when you stood up and made your speech, Bobby. Tom's voice was steady, without malice. He was 61 years old and had been a county assessor for 30 years. He knew what a lien meant. He knew what a deed meant. And now he knew what my father's announcement was actually worth. My mother had stopped talking. She sat with both hands flat on the table, staring at the center of her plate like it contained instructions. She didn't cry. She went quiet, which was worse. My mother's silence was the sound of a woman whose script had just been shredded in front of a live audience. Cousins shifted. A few stood and murmured about checking on the kids. Aunt Lorraine excused herself to the bathroom and didn't come back for 20 minutes. Derek hadn't raised his head. My father looked at me like I'd driven a truck through the living room. Are you satisfied? He said. You've destroyed this family reunion. I didn't destroy anything, Dad. I just stopped pretending. I sat down. My part was finished. I had said the truth. No binder of evidence, no PowerPoint, no dramatic unveiling. Just numbers spoken at conversational volume that anybody at the table could verify with a phone and a search bar. I folded my hands in my lap. I drank my water. And then, at the far table, my grandfather placed both palms flat on the surface and pushed himself to his feet. Raymond stood the way old soldiers stand, slowly, deliberately, as if the act of rising were a statement in itself. He was 84 and lean, built like a fence post that refused to lean. He took off his veteran's cap and held it at his side. Underneath, his hair was silver, cropped short, regulation length even after 20 years of retirement. Sit down, everyone. I have something to say. My father started to object. Dad, not now. Robert. Just his name. Command voice. The kind of voice that could stop a 20-year-old soldier from charging into fire, and it worked just the same on a 62-year-old man who sold lumber for a living. You had your turn, now it's mine. My father sat. Everyone sat. Even the toddler on the swing set went quiet, as though the air pressure had changed. Raymond looked around the table. He took his time, let his gaze settle on each face like a man cataloging who was present and who would remember this. Most of you know me as a retired army man who grows tomatoes and fixes the fence when it falls down. Some of you probably think I'm a little senile. A few uncomfortable laughs. Someone cleared their throat. I served 26 years in the United States Army Special Forces. I held the rank of Command Sergeant Major. I have 3 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star. I served in Vietnam before half of you were born, and I served in Grenada before the other half knew where it was. The laughter stopped. Marlene nodded from her chair. She was the only one who didn't look surprised. My father opened his mouth. Raymond raised one hand, palm flat, fingers together. My father closed his mouth, like he was 12 years old again and had just been caught with his hand in something that wasn't his. When I came home from my last deployment, Raymond said, "Your grandmother, God rest her, asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to grow things. So I grew things. I let my son believe I was a simple old man because it was easier than explaining what I'd seen and what it had cost me." He paused. Not for effect. Raymond didn't do effect. He paused because some sentences need space around them. But I also invested, quietly, for 30 years, in index funds and rental properties in 4 counties across western North Carolina. Your grandmother knew. Marlene knows. My attorney at Morrison and Welch knows. The IRS certainly knows. Another pause. He looked at my father. Nobody in this family ever asked. He let that sit. Asked. The simplest word. The thing nobody did. Not about his service, not about his money, not about what he thought or felt or planned. They assumed he was a pensioner with a garden and a cabin. They were wrong by $8.2 million. "I tried to tell you, Robert," he said. "I tried for 10 years. You told me I didn't understand business. You told me I was old-fashioned. You said, 'Times have changed, Dad.' So I stopped talking and I started watching." My father's lips moved, forming the beginning of a defense. "Dad, I didn't mean, don't." Raymond's voice dropped half a register. "You meant every word, and I watched you mean it for a decade." He scanned the table again. "What I watched was you take your daughter's sacrifice and turn it into a footnote. I watched you hand a drowning man the keys to a ship and call it an inheritance, and I decided it was time to stop watching and start acting." Raymond reached under his chair and placed the brown leather folder on the table. Several people leaned forward. Marlene straightened in her seat. "2 years ago," Raymond said, "I met with an estate attorney in Asheville. I established an irrevocable trust. Under North Carolina statute, that means it is presumptively permanent, extremely difficult to modify, revoke, or set aside by anyone in this family, including me." My father stared at the folder like it was a grenade. "What trust? What are you talking about?" Raymond ignored him. He opened the folder and laid the first page flat so the table could see the letterhead. "The Henderson Legacy Trust holds $8.2 million in assets. Rental properties in 4 counties. Index fund holdings with Vanguard. 30 years of compound interest from a man everyone assumed couldn't afford new boots." Someone at the end of the table, I think it was Aunt Carol, made a sound like she'd swallowed wrong. My mother's mouth was open, but nothing was coming out. Derek lifted his head for the first time in minutes. "The trustee," Raymond continued, "the person who manages every dollar, every decision, every distribution from this trust, is not my son." He turned to me. The whole table turned with him. "The trustee is my granddaughter, Sergeant First Class Faith Henderson, 16 years of honorable service, 2 combat deployments, $0 unaccounted for." He closed the folder. "I didn't choose her because she's my granddaughter, and I didn't choose her because I feel sorry for her. I chose her because in 16 years she never once served herself first. She is the most qualified financial manager in this family, and the only person at this table who has proven she can be trusted with other people's money." My father's chair hit the grass behind him. He was on his feet, face the color of a stopped-up pipe, dark, pressurized, about to blow. "This is insane," he said. "Dad, you can't do this. It's irrevocable, Robert. That means I already did." $8 million. My father's voice cracked on the number, split right down the middle. "You had $8 million and you never— I built that store from nothing. I worked every single day for 30 years. I gave up weekends. I gave up vacations. I gave up my back and both my knees. And you gave it all to her?" Raymond looked at his son with something that might have been grief, or might have been the exhaustion of a man who had tried to teach a lesson that refused to be learned. "I didn't give her a store, Robert. I gave her a responsibility, because she's the only person at this table who's earned one." My mother reached across the table toward me. "Faith, tell your grandfather this isn't right." I kept my hands in my lap. It's not my decision to make, Mom. It's his. My father was red-faced now. Veins stood out on his neck. Derek stared at the tablecloth. My mother gripped the edge of the table, and I sat still, hands folded, shoulders level, like I was in a briefing room, like I'd heard mortar fire and this wasn't it. Dad, I said, and I said it quietly, so he had to stop shouting to hear me. You said, "Thank you for saving our house." You were right. I did save it. The mortgage, the taxes, the contractors, the insurance. 5 years. And I'm going to keep it saved. I paused. I didn't save it for you. The yard went silent. Raymond waited until the silence had settled into every corner of the yard, into the folding chairs and the paper plates, and the spaces between people who were rearranging everything they thought they knew about their family. Then he spoke. I want to be clear about something. This trust is not a punishment, it is a correction. He stepped away from his table and walked, slowly, steadily, toward the center of the yard, where everyone could see him. For 30 years, I watched my son build something with his hands and lose sight of what he was building it for. He confused the store with the family. He confused staying with loyalty. He confused silence with weakness. He paused and looked at the faces around him. Some people serve, he said, full voice now. Others just stay. The line landed like a blade on a chopping block. Clean. Final. Several people flinched. Faith served this country for 16 years. She served this house for 5. She serves strangers she'll never meet through a program called Steady Ground that teaches families how to manage their money. She did all of it without asking for a single thing in return. And when she tried to warn this family about the debts that were eating it alive, she was told she was jealous. He turned to Derek. His voice dropped. Not soft, but precise, like a surgeon cutting close to something vital. Derek, you're not a bad man. You're a man who was set up to fail by a father who needed you to succeed in his image. Get help with the debt. The trust will cover professional debt counseling. But Faith decides when and how the funds are released. That's her authority now. Derek looked at me. His eyes were red and wet. He nodded once. Marlene stood. She didn't rush it. She smoothed her blouse, pushed back her chair, and rose the way a witness rises in a courtroom, with purpose and the understanding that what she was about to say would be entered into the record. I witnessed the trust signing 2 years ago in the offices of Morrison and Welch, she said. I've known Raymond for 22 years. Everything he's told you today is true. His military service record, the asset portfolio, the legal structure of the trust. It's all verified. It's all documented. And it's all final. Uncle Tom exhaled. My God, Raymond. All these years. All these years, Tom, my grandfather said. I was waiting for my son to see what was right in front of him. He never did. So I stopped waiting. My mother spoke for the first time in minutes. Her voice was barely there, thin, like paper tearing slowly. But the house... We thought... The house stays, Mom. The table looked at me. I'm not selling it. I'm not filing a partition action. The mortgage stays in my name because I'm the one making the payments. When it's paid off, 4 more years, we'll talk about what's fair. As a family. At a table. Not as a speech in front of 40 people. That was the part nobody expected. I could have sold the house. I could have forced a partition and walked away with my share. I could have filed against Derek's liens and let the creditors pick the bones clean. I didn't. The house stayed. My parents could live in it, but it stayed on my terms. The terms of the person who'd been paying for it all along. My mother put her face in her hands and cried. Real tears this time, the kind that come when you realize what you missed while you were busy being right. I stood one last time. Not to leave, to be seen. I want to say one thing to everyone here. The yard was still. Even the wind had paused. I didn't come to this reunion to fight. I came because my grandfather asked me to. I've spent 16 years serving a country that says thank you with a VA loan and a handshake. I spent 5 of those years serving a family that says thank you by giving my brother the house I kept standing. I don't need the house. I don't need the 8.2 million. I have a career I'm proud of. I have a program that helps 300 families a year learn how to manage what they earn without anyone taking it from them. What I needed, the only thing I ever needed, was for someone in this family to see me. Really, see me. Not as the daughter who left, not as the sister who was jealous, as the woman who showed up every single time she was called and never once asked for credit. I looked at my grandfather. Grandpa saw me. I looked at my father. He was sitting in his chair with his hands flat on the table, pressing down as if the table were the only thing keeping him from sinking through the earth. I hope someday you will too, Dad. I picked up my glass, took a sip of water, sat down. Not a drop spilled, not a voice raised. Walking back to my chair, my hand brushed the kitchen doorframe, the spot where the brass doorknob catches the afternoon light. I'd polished it 53 times over 5 years. I didn't touch it now. I didn't need to prove I'd been here anymore. Everyone at the table already knew. Nobody spoke for a long time. 30 seconds. A minute. The cicadas sang. A child's voice floated from the swing set. Something about a ladybug. The ordinary sounds of a summer afternoon that had been ordinary until about 20 minutes ago. Raymond lowered himself back into his chair. He put his veteran's cap on, adjusting it with the precision of a man who had worn one for a quarter century. Then he said, "One more thing." Every head turned. Steady ground. Faith's program for military families. I enrolled myself 8 months ago. A murmur rippled through the table. My father looked confused. Raymond continued, "I didn't enroll because I need financial counseling. I enrolled because I wanted to see with my own eyes what my granddaughter built with her own hands, on her own time, for no pay." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his shirt pocket. 300 families enrolled. Average debt reduction, 42%. Default rate among participants, near zero. She runs it 3 evenings a week after her regular duty shift. Every session is free. He put the paper back in his pocket and looked at my father. "You built a hardware store, Robert. She built a lifeline. And you couldn't see the difference." He slid the brown leather folder across the table to me. "It's yours, Faith. Every page." I took it. My hands were steady. Marlene squeezed Raymond's arm. Beth across the table caught my eye and mouthed, "I see you." Derek pushed back from the table, walked around to where I sat. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was raw, scraped down to the studs. I nodded. One nod. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Not yet. My father said nothing. My mother was still crying. That evening, I sat in my grandfather's cabin with the folder in my lap. The cedar smell from the footlocker had faded to a whisper, but it clung to the leather under my fingers, faint and stubborn, like a memory that refused to be forgotten. 3 months later, the numbers told the story the way numbers always do, without sentiment, without spin. Derek enrolled in a business debt restructuring program. The trust, per my authorization as trustee, covered his counseling fees and financial planning sessions, but it did not pay the liens directly. Derek negotiated his own payment plan with the 3 merchant cash advance companies. He closed the second Henderson hardware location and focused on the original store. By September, it was profitable again. Barely. But the bleeding had stopped. My father texted me once a week. Short messages. "How are you?" "No question mark." I replied. 1 or 2 sentences. We were rebuilding something, but I didn't know what shape it would take, and I wasn't going to rush it. Some walls you don't tear down overnight. Some walls you dismantle 1 brick at a time, and some you just learn to live with while you build a door. My mother called on the first Sunday of every month. She cried every time. Sometimes we talked about nothing. The weather in Asheville, a recipe she'd found, the tomatoes in Raymond's garden. Sometimes she said, "I should have listened." I didn't argue. I didn't reassure. I listened the way she needed to be listened to, and then I said goodnight. Raymond was healthy. Still growing tomatoes. still fixing the fence when the wind knocked a post loose. He called me every Sunday, same as always, and we talked about the trust, about steady ground, about whether the Braves had a shot at the playoffs. He never said, "I told you so." That wasn't his style. Steady ground expanded. I secured a partnership with the Fort Liberty Family Readiness Group and brought the program to 2 additional installations. 500 families now. The house stayed in my name. Derek moved into a small rental near the store. The house became what it should have been all along, a family place for holidays and gatherings, not a trophy for one person's ego. I drove back to Asheville one weekend in October. Walked up the porch steps. My hand found the brass doorknob. Cool, smooth, slightly tarnished. I didn't polish it. Someone else would have to learn to take care of it now. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't saving my family's house, or managing an $8 million trust, or standing in front of 40 relatives while my father pretended I didn't matter. The hardest thing was learning that serving someone doesn't obligate them to see you, and that being unseen doesn't make your service worth any less. A brass doorknob polished 53 times, a cedar footlocker full of medals, and a truth nobody asked about. 300 families who learn to stand on steady ground. If someone in your life does the work that no one sees, tell them. Today, before a family reunion does it for you, share this story, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories.